And go ahead. So, I'm Erik Andrus, and I have a little farm, 110 acres on the other side of the ridge in Ferrisburg, and come here today to talk a little bit about where I see the future of Vermont food going. And let's see, the other day, this was less than a couple weeks ago in the Addison Independent, a guy, James H. Maroney Jr. in Leicester, wrote a very long piece about the state of dairy farming, and it was directed to the incoming Secretary of Agriculture. And I'll just quote briefly from the piece that he wrote, which was quite lengthy. The business model for conventional farming is predicated upon crowding as many cows under one roof as access to capital and land will allow, feeding them high-protein corn concentrates for maximum production, milking them 3 times a day, and externalizing the true costs of soil fertility and weed control into the lake. Look around. Empirically, the results of the paradigm are overproduction, low prices, farm attrition, and lake pollution. The model cannot be achieved without inviting these results. And the problem for us is that the vast majority of our statewide acreage is implicated in this failing model, which is a commodity model that exploits animals and dehumanizes farmers and laborers and destroys the environment. Could I move to the one you have next, please? No, the graph, please.
This is the graph.
Okay, great. Yep. So this is something that I've drafted. And in order to know where we're going and where it's important to know where we've been. And this is not, well, let me put it this way. One of my kids has a fluffy stuffed globe that has a map of the world on it. And in small print, like down near Australia, it says, not to be used for navigational purposes. Like a pillow type thing. So this is not to be used for navigational purposes, but as best I could come up with the information. This is the history of European-type farming in the state of Vermont. And the blue line is the population, starting with 85,000 settlers in 1791. There aren't good figures for before that. And then the present-day population, 621,000 and change. And the red line is the proportion of the blue line of the general public that are full-time primary farm operators. Or no, sorry, this line right here. Okay, so it starts out with a decent majority of the whole population is engaged in farming full-time. So if there's 85,000, then it stands to reason that probably about 60,000 or so people were farming as their primary livelihood. And today we have around 6,000, depending on whose statistics you read. So you can see that the proportion of people who are farming in terms of share of the general population is really minuscule. It's about in line with the national average, which is around 1%. 1% of people farming in the state. 600,000 out of 621,000. So the other line is the amount of acreage that was farmed in the state. Vermont has approximately 6 million acres, including swamp, mountain, fields, cultivated fields, and pasture. So physically speaking, that's 10 acres of land for every man, woman, and child in the state of Vermont, which is a lot of space, relative to other states in the Union. We're living pretty thinly on the ground, although not evenly distributed over the state, and I'll get to that later. So I plotted them on the same graph, even though clearly acres and people are not the same variable, but, and I didn't do a very good job drafting it either, because you can see that the acreage line is below the line of people, but this is actually units of 10 acres. Well, I'm starting here in 1791. So basically, in 1791, you had approximately 10 cleared acres, 10 farmed acres for every farmer. coming into the peak of the sheep period, you had 2 out of 3 acres in the entire state cleared and used for farming. So this was a time when basically all you were left with was swamps and ridgelines that had any trees. Everything else was used for farming. So when we talk about returning to a future in which Vermonters are supported by our own natural farming resources, we don't want to return to this point, because this was farming used to create a level of ecological devastation from which the forest still hadn't recovered. So
you'd be looking at Wales.
Yeah, basically. But I'm here to talk about what I see as perhaps a balanced future in which we're using agriculture in collaboration with the environment rather than as a means of drawing commodities out of the environment and destroying it in the process. This line that I've sketched across here is the level of about 2 million acres. So if say, for instance, the settlers had stuck with only the good class 1 and 2 arable soils in Vermont, say, for instance, that instead of, say the West had never opened up, commodity prices had never dropped, and we had kind of a steady state feudal type economy like you had in the Middle Ages in Europe, then we might have had a river bottom type agriculture that would have leveled off and sustained population at about that 2 million acre level for quite some period of time. Instead, what you had was a peak, the sheep period, devastation and degradation of agricultural soils throughout the state. And now we're actually dropping below. We have plenty of agricultural soils in the state that are no longer in use because the competition with the West is so severe. And in fact, we have only about 700,000 acres of agricultural soils being used for farming today. The remainder is in lawns or growing up to brush.